The Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series is organized by ACE and Associates, which provides a holistic asset protection and risk management consultancy services that emphasizes convergence of all aspects of security from conception to implementation. Also, Security Matters, a news network and data aggregator, a leading source of information that covers issues on the global, national, and socioeconomic spectrum. Arslan Security, another partner, provides the best-in-class total security solutions to a wide range of corporate and entertainment clients globally since 2010. Resilient.PH, a startup multi-platform social enterprise committed to advancing resilience programming across institutions in the Philippines. The Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research, an independent academic research institute and a non-government, non-profit, non-partisan think tank. They have been a partner of the Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series from the beginning. Good day once again, everybody. We shall now officially begin our Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series. And to usher in the entire event, please welcome Sir Ace Esmeralda, President and Managing Director of Ace and Associates.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning from the Philippines, and I'd like to recognize everybody's presence. I could see familiar faces and my seniors in the profession, seniors in the military, and my colleagues in the security industry, and my colleagues in the disaster risk and crisis management world also. I'd like to express my gratitude also to the speakers that we have for today. They will be aptly introduced by Direct Presto of Arslan SRS, one of our sponsors. We like to recognize the presence of the seniors in the security industry and those from the ASIS International, especially in Region 13 and 14. Thank you for attending, and I hope you keep on sharing so that sharing the link so that others can still catch up with this lecture series. This is the fourth of the Anti-Terrorism lecture series of Security Matters magazine, and it is always powered by in content by ACE and Associates Risk Management Incorporated. We believe that terrorism is something that we really have to prepare for and then understand, even in times of COVID. Because while we are battling COVID, there are always people planning to take advantage of us that they assume that we are disrupted or distracted or not focused on anti-terrorism or counter-terrorism initiatives. But one important thing is that everything starts with understanding, and understanding comes from learning. That's why Security Matters and ACE and Associates, we always hold webinars that are really to educate and elevate the standards of our understanding on several topics that affects asset protection and risk management. And in today's world, we have invited Resilient.PH, or Resilient Philippines, where their Chief Communication Officer is our MC today. We consider resiliency as already the end goal of all what we do in asset protection. And terrorism is one of those in the segment of human-induced disasters. We always think that the disaster that is happening in areas of southern Mindanao or southern Philippines will not affect us in the urban areas. But this is very crucial to understand that Hulu, Sulu, or Basilan areas could just be their testing ground for suicide bombers that they can deploy to other countries, not only in Philippines or in Manila or in Davao or in Cebu, but also to other countries, because most or almost all the suicide bombers are foreigners. No? So we have to consider that not only foreigners, but they're already using women. And we anticipate that the surviving daughters of those who committed suicide bombings may be the next suicide bomber. So these are just the dynamics that we have to look into our environment. Most of us, our backgrounds could be cybersecurity and physical security like me, but we have to shift our mind into looking at how terrorism can create a disaster that will affect our businesses. So we have to look at resiliency and a different lens. No, we call that at Resilient.PH as resiliency lens and resiliency risk assessments. So we are also doing, for example, Ace and Associates is the security consultant of several real estate companies, and we design the physical structures, no, security inputs of these buildings, these estates. But then we have to put into consideration on also two things now: how to maintain physical distancing, and how to maintain or cleanliness and safety or sanitation or hygiene of the places, incorporate them into the physical design. And number two is that how do you protect them, or how do we mitigate the impact of suicide bombers? So we just don't think about vehicle-borne attacks, because that's always in our mindset already. We have dogs, we have bollards, but what about a human, a human being that is already a very determined and passionate suicide bomber? So those are the things that we have to consider on this environment now. That's why ACE and Associates sponsored and hosted this event together with the ASIS International Chapter in the Philippines and Region 13. And we also thank always the support of the Institute of Professor Banlaoi. And we are thankful that he has been supporting us on this Anti-Terrorism lecture series. And everyone is encouraged to interact with us, to send us all your comments or your requested topics to be discussed. And we can always open it up to the Philippines and to the Asia Pacific, because terrorism or criminalities doesn't already recognize geopolitical boundaries. So thank you everyone for joining us, and you can contact me anytime. You can check on the QR codes of the Slido and the events, and then I'll bring back the floor now to Wally. Thank you, Wally.
Thank you, Sir Ace. And to introduce our first speaker, I'd like to call Sir Derek Presto, Vice President for Operations of Arslan SRS Philippines. Sir Derek.
Hi everyone, I'm Derek Presto from Arslan SRS Philippines. I'm going to introduce Sir Kumar Ramakrishna. Okay. Kumar is a tenured associate professor, associate dean in charge of policy studies, as well as head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Okay. Sorry. Prior to this appointment, he was head Center of Excellence for National Security in 2006 and to 2015, and head National Security Studies Program from 2016 to 2020. He remains as research advisor to NSSP. He obtained in 1992. In 1999, his current history with a focused interest include British propaganda in the Malayan emergency, propaganda theory, and practice, history of strategic thought, and counter-terrorism with focus interests include British propaganda in Malayan emergency, a focus, on radicalization. He was an Asia Foundation Freeman Fellow in June 2002 and a visiting research fellow at the Institute of National Strategic Studies, National Defense University, Washington, D.C. from April to June 2003. He was an Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade special visitor in March 2003 and an international visitor for the Australian Attorney General Department in 2012. In 2008, he was appointed as a senior advisor to the Trusted Information Network on Extremism and Transnational Crime in the Southeast Asia and Australia, a joint project of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and the Lowy Institute for International Policy in Sydney, Australia. In July 2015, he served as a member of External Reference Group for the Washington, D.C. for the United Nations Secretary General Draft Plan of Action for Preventing Violent Extremism. In recognition of the international contribution he has made to research into extremism, in January 2016, he was also appointed as an honorary visiting senior research fellow at the Center for the Resolution of Intractable Conflict, based at Harris Manchester College, Oxford University, UK. He has been a frequent speaker on counter-terrorism before local international audiences, a regular media commentator on the issue and published in numerous and international refereed journals. He has co-edited two well-received books on counter-terrorism: The New Terrorism, Anatomy, Trends and Counter Strategies in 2002, as well as After Bali, The Threat of Terrorism in Southeast Asia in 2004. His first major single-authored book, Emergency Propaganda, The Winning of Malayan Hearts and Minds, 1948 to 1958, was described by the International History Review as required reading for historians of Malaya and for those whose task is counter insurgents, guerrillas, and terrorists. Most his recent book, Radical Pathways, Understanding Muslim Radicalization in Indonesia, 2009, was identified by Perspectives on Terrorism in May 2012 as one of the top 150 books on terrorism, counter-terrorism, as well as important and insightful case study on the pathways of extremism and violent jihad in Indonesia. His most recent books are Islamist Terrorism and Militancy in Indonesia, The Power of the Mindset 2015, Original Sin, Revising the Revisionist and Critique of the 1963. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Kumar Ramakrishna.
Okay, hi everyone. Very good morning. It's good to be here this morning to be able to share with you some personal views on this particular very interesting, very topical subject. First of all, I'd like to thank my colleagues from Security Matters, ACE and Associates, Resilient.PH, ASIS International, and of course, thanks very much for the very kind introduction, colleague from Arslan, SRS, and of course, I have to thank my very good dear friend and colleague of many years standing, Prof. Rommel Banlaoi, and my other colleagues at PIP-VTR. So we have been associated for many, many years, and we would like to continue engaging one another and to collaborate with our colleagues PIP-VTR and in fact our other friends here. So right now, I'll just go into my slides, so I hope we can see that. I will try to focus on the wider context for the session by Rommel, who will zoom in on the Philippine situation, of course, in particular, which I can imagine will be very of great interest to this audience. But also, I will touch on that as well. But I thought that I should begin by contextualizing where we are at in terms of our global struggle against terrorism and violent extremism. On today, the 19 years after the September 11 attacks, right? So in this part of my presentation, at least my part, I would like to help us to understand the evolving nature of the terrorist threat to Southeast Asia and beyond, as well as to zoom in the time available on the ideological and physical aspects of the threat. I want to also compare and contrast Islamist extremism, which is something we are very familiar with in Southeast Asia, of course, with a growing threat of white supremacist extremism, which may not be widely recognized in our part of the world, but I would suggest we should be also paying attention to, because this is a growing threat. So what can we say about the changing nature of terrorism? Well, I think the first thing we have to recognize is that after many decades, there is still no officially accepted, universally identified, legally binding definition of terrorism. I mean, the United Nations have not been able to do that. There has been an academic consensus understanding, but nothing legally binding, which all states in all places will accept as a single universal definition of terrorism. Having said that, as terrorism analysts, right, practitioners and analysts, both in university research institutes as well as think tanks, we need a working understanding, right? So one possible working understanding, right, which not everybody will of course agree with, but I think most people would kind of accept, is that terrorism is sometimes defined as the deliberate use of extra-normal violence by a terrorist group to force a population and its government to give in to terrorist demands. So the key elements are the use or the threat of extra-normal violence. The violence has got to be extra-normal in the sense that it's iconic, right? You're not likely to forget it soon. So think in terms of September 11. Think, for example, of ISIS beheadings, which are very hard to forget, right? So you see, according to some terrorism scholars, we are currently in the fourth wave of terrorism, which is essentially the religiously inspired waves of terrorism currently, right? What do I mean? In earlier secular waves of terrorism, the terrorists wanted a lot of people watching, not necessarily a lot of people dead, right? So the terrorists wanted to create an impact. Essentially, they had earthly goals. They wanted to compel governments to give in to the demand. So their goals must be something which could be negotiated, which you could visualize and you could attain through the threat of force, right? So they didn't, in the past, terrorist groups didn't necessarily want to kill a lot of people. They would kill collaborators, right? Collaborators that are directly related to the government to send a message, because ultimately terrorism it's always been a form of political communication or psychological warfare. It is to compel the government to give in to your demands, right? So in the past, terrorists didn't necessarily want a lot of people dead. They just wanted a lot of people watching, so that those people watching would be afraid and pressure the governments to give in to terrorist groups' demands. But in the current era of religious and identity-driven terrorism, things have shifted. Mass casualty attacks where civilians are directly targeted have become more common. So religious and identity-motivated terrorists want a lot of people watching, as well as want a lot of people dead, because the idea is, there's killing people who are not of the same community is a divine sanction. It is divinely mandated by God, you know, in the religiously motivated way, right? So this is a big topic, but for this presentation this morning, I'll just focus on Islamists and the white supremacists. So of course, I don't need to tell this audience that Islamist extremist terrorism still persists. And I know we, especially you in the Philippines, are aware that ISIS has sought to expand influence into Southeast Asia. And we all know that between May and October 2017, ISIS-linked fighters were engaged with the Philippines military to capture the city of Marawi in Mindanao in southern Philippines. And why Mindanao? I mean, if you look at how Al-Qaeda and ISIS have operated globally, right? They've always tried to fish in troubled waters, right? They will look for conflict zones, zones where there are a lot of grievances, lots of tensions between the community in that zone and the central government, for example. And they will exploit local grievances and frame them according to their global agenda. So this is, we have seen this around the world, and we have certainly seen this in Mindanao, right? And as we know, during the Marawi battle in 2017, foreign fighters from Indonesia, Malaysia, and even beyond the region were detected. And there was even evidence of operational and funding links with ISIS Central in Syria. And of course, we know very well that in January 2019, there was a suicide attack at the Catholic Church in Yolo, in the Sulu Archipelago. Abu Sayyaf group faction was involved. ISIS claimed responsibility. And just very recently, right, there was another suicide bombing by female relatives of slain and dead Abu Sayyaf militants, also in Yolo, right? So we can see, as colleague Ace Esmeralda pointed out in his opening remarks, you know, the Sulu region is a testing ground, appears to be a testing ground for suicide bombers, foreign militants, and increasingly even women, right? So this is a trend which has to be watched. And it's not just the Philippines that is impacted by the terrorism threat, right? I mean, even in Singapore, we have had a situation where Singaporean militants have been inducted into ISIS, and the gentleman at the bottom here, his name was Abu Yukail. He was a Singaporean militant. He was actually shown on a ISIS video where he exhorted East Asians to rise up against their governments and you know, overthrow them and set up an Islamic State. And even in this particular video, he executed a dealing prisoner together with two other Southeast Asians. So this is a region-wide problem of Islamist extremism and terrorism. So the threat is very real. And I should point out that one of the big recent trends, when you look at the Southeast Asia, is this whole trend of radicalized families. You know, I mean, we are noted that in the Philippines, some of these suicide attacks have involved couples, right? Especially in August this year. Apparently, one of the females involved was the spouse of another suicide bomber last year in the Philippines. So families are involved, but it's not just Philippines. In Indonesia, we have seen this as well, radicalized families. This very sad incident in Surabaya, the bombings of a church, of churches and a police station were carried out by families, you know, radicalized families, right? And in fact, just last year, there was a couple, a radicalized couple, that attacked an Indonesian security minister in October 2019. And in Indonesia, these families were associated with Jamaah Ansarud Daulah network led by the Indonesian pro-ISIS ideologue Ahmad Abdul Rahman. So the families in the May 2018 Surabaya attack were highly immersed in Islamist extremist ideology. Preachers, they listen to preachers and they watch videos at weekly Jamaah Ansarud Daulah meetings, right? So again, this reinforces the dangers of extremist Islamist ideology, and particularly in recent times, how couples, female, wives, spouses, even children have been, radicalized. So this is a dangerous trend which should be looked at. Well, what are we talking about when we talk about Islamist extremism? We need to be aware of what fuels, what motivates these extremists, right? So what drives ISIS and Al Qaeda? Academics have different terminologies, but essentially they're talking about the same thing. So when you talk about Islamist extremism, in the literature, the people also talk about Salafi jihadism, jihadi Salafism, radical Islam, even Bin Ladenism, Al Qaedaism, So, but whatever all these isms are, they are talking about roughly the same narrative, right? So this narrative portrays the Muslim world as involved in a cosmic war for survival with an evil Jewish crusader axis, which essentially means the US and Israel and a coalition of friendly governments. So whether you look at Al-Qaeda propaganda or even Southeast Asian Islamist extremist propaganda, the phrase Jewish crusader axis keeps popping up. So essentially, this is the enemy, right? So against the evil Jewish crusader axis, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the affiliated networks around the world are said to be the vanguard of the global Muslim community, defending the Islamic world against the Jewish crusader axis. And this is very much empowered by social media and the internet, right? So these narratives spread around, like ideological viruses, right? Around social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you name it, right? So this goes around, and so it's very accessible to anybody around the world with an internet connection. You can, or with a smartphone, which is internet and connected, right? So there is this narrative floating around, which is relatively easily accessible. And a key element of Islamist extremist thought includes the notion that there is no such thing as an innocent civilian, right? I mean, if you study the laws of armed conflict, right, humanitarian laws, right, there's such a thing as non-combatant immunity, right? Civilians are not supposed to be targeted in war, but the Al Qaeda and ISIS ideologues have sort of junk that. They don't accept that concept, because they say that even non-combatant civilians are guilty. They can be targeted because although they are not directly involved in, according to the ideology, according to the narrative, opposing civilians, Muslim civilians around the world, their taxes and their political support enable Western and allied governments to engage in such oppression of Muslims in various parts of the world. So there's no such thing as innocent civilians, and they can be targeted. This is why you have suicide attacks on shopping centers, bus stations, train stations, aviation, because there's no such thing, according to this ideology, there's no such thing as innocent civilians. So this is what makes the extremist Islamist ideology so dangerous. And the other key element is the idea that if the US and its allies kill innocent Muslim civilians in various places, then the militants, according to the principle of an eye for an eye, will kill Western civilians and allied civilians as well, even in Southeast Asia, right? So there is this idea of an eye for an eye. You kill my people, I will kill your people as well in retaliation, right? So, for example, in recent years, there was this concern about the drone strikes mounted by the US military in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Although the drone strikes in theory supposed to be precision targeting, they're not always successful, of course, in the fog of war to be able to kill militants. Sometimes, unfortunately, very sadly, civilians get killed. But precisely this what some people call collateral damage, right? It's people dying, right? These pictures, right, images of civilians being killed, children being killed, are exploited by extremist ideologues on social media, and this is how they radicalize more young people in the wider Muslim world. But now I would like to compare and contrast very briefly the Islamist extremists with a very dangerous emerging trend, white supremacist extremism. Now, this is a very broad movement, right? It's actually very complex. There are many various strands, right? But some of the key elements include white nationalism, neo-Nazism, various elements of Christian Reconstructionism, Christian identity. For example, in 1995, Timothy McVeigh, who bombed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, Oklahoma City, he was associated with Christian identity movement, right, which is ultimately kind of linked to the white supremacist overall movement. You know, in identitarianism is a similar movement in Europe, but it's also spread to America. And there are other emerging strains. I mean, we can talk about this if you're interested later during the Q&A. But one key theme, right? One key theme of white supremacism, which is quite significant for us in our part of the world, this idea of white genocide, i.e., some of these white supremacists fear that Judeo-Christian European nations are under threat by non-white immigration, particularly Muslims. But it's not just Muslims. In some cases, it's Hispanics. In the US, in some cases, it's Jews, or it can be Asians. But essentially, the fear is white European identity. White identity is going to be destroyed and overcome by non-whites. So, for example, last year, Brenton Tarrant, who attacked the two mosques in New Zealand, the Christchurch, he talked about white genocide as well. And in fact, the name of his track, right, was called The Great Replacement, which is a key idea of some white supremacists, the idea that the European identity is going to be replaced by non-European identity, non-white identity. And just like you have Al-Qaeda and ISIS, right, amongst the white supremacist movement, the broad movement, there are various groups that have emerged. You know, these two gentlemen below, right, on the left is Anders Breivik, who killed 37 people in Norway in 2011. He referenced the so-called Knights Templar, which is a 12th century Christian force that fought against Muslims during the Crusades. And apparently there was a reborn Knights Templar, which he referenced. Brenton Tarrant on the right, who was influenced by Breivik, also referenced the reborn Knights Templar as well. But there are other European networks that have emerged and which keep emerging. For example, many analysts have talked about a Ukrainian group called the Azov Battalion that actually has been trying to train white supremacist fighters from around the world, similar to how Al-Qaeda in the past in Afghanistan trained Islamist fighters from around the world. So you have a kind of a mirror image phenomenon happening. So in fact, in recent times, you have groups like the Base, the Atom Weapon Division, and other similar groups emerging, and all are trying to defend European white identity, right? And just like the Islamists, they also are empowered by the internet through a form of leaderless resistance. In fact, Anders Breivik talked about the global leaderless resistance, which can exploit the internet to organize. And who are the targets, right? If Western governments and civilians who support Western governments are the targets in the case of the Islamist extremists, in the case of the white supremacists, Western political elites who promote multiculturalism are said to be guilty of aiding and abetting white genocide and should be targeted. And of course, as well as the non-white invaders, the term they use is invaders, whatever non-white populations they are, like including Asians or Muslims, who are overwhelming white populations and their social systems worldwide through greater fertility rates. Because, for example, Tarrant talked about in his track, right, The Great Replacement, how fertility rates amongst Muslims in particular have overwhelmed that of the white populations, and they are going to be the white people are going to be replaced. So there's this fear, this anxiety, existential anxiety of a replacement that drives these militants, these extremists. And also, just like the Islamist extremists who have this principle of reciprocity, an eye for an eye, the same drive exists on the white supremacist side, the same eye for an eye retaliation principle. For example, you look at Tarrant's manifesto from 2019, right? He he said that he claimed in his manifesto, he wanted to take revenge for hundreds of thousands of deaths caused by foreign invaders throughout European history, like the Crusades and talking about that period, medieval period. But more in recent times, he wanted to take revenge for thousands of European lives lost to terror attacks by Al-Qaeda and ISIS throughout European lands. And in particular, in his manifesto, he appeared to be very affected by the death of this young Swedish girl, Ebba Ekelund, in Stockholm, April 2017, who was killed in a car ramming attack by an Islamist extremist. So they seem to, the white supremacist extremists and the Islamist extremists seem to be mirror imaging each other. And in fact, in terms of tactics, they do look at each other as well. So as I mentioned, white supremacist terrorism is fueled by Islamist terrorism and vice versa. So you have this dangerous spiral of co-radicalization or reciprocal radicalization. Both sides radicalize each other and both sides will, take revenge on one another. And they have they justify it using their own respective ideologies. So let's compare the threats, right? If we look at what has happened since September 11, right, and 2016 to 201 and 2016, 73% of deadly violent extremist incidents in the US were actually perpetrated by white supremacist extremists. Islamists were responsible for only 23%. So in the US, right, between 2001 and 2016, actually, there was a bigger threat from the white supremacist extremists. And in fact, just recently, there were reports of a draft Department of Homeland Security document identifying white supremacist extremists as the bigger threat. So, but if you take Western Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand as a whole, right, white supremacist attacks made up 17.2% of all terrorist incidents compared to only 6.8% by the Islamist extremist networks, right? That was by the Institute for Economics of Peace last year, a significant report. But on the other hand, if you look at, according to a Europol report 2018, right, from 1970 to 2018 in the West, there have been 26 Islamist attacks which killed at least 10 people, right, as opposed to 11 white supremacist terrorist attacks, right? So while white supremacist terrorist attacks in the West may be increasingly more common, they are not as lethal or deadly as the Islamist terrorist attacks, right? With the average Islamist attack since 1970 causing 3.6 deaths, if you don't count September 11, as opposed to 0.92 deaths for white supremacist terrorists. So in other words, at this point in time, while there may be increasingly more white supremacist incidents, they are still not as deadly as the Islamist extremist incidents, right? So you still have the situation developing, but this is the current situation. So, I mean, what should we be concerned about, right? So there were two types of physical threats. One is a threat of organized terrorist networks, and the other is a bit more difficult, in fact, more dangerous and harder to detect, is lone wolves or lone actors who may be inspired but not necessarily directed by organized networks, right? So this is what I'll explain. If you look at our part of the world, right, ISIS in Southeast Asia, ISIS has been in Southeast Asia for a while now, right? So future attacks by relatively organized Islamist extremist terror networks could take the form of, for example, plots by local groups on behalf of ISIS. For example, if you look at the pictures, right? The gentleman below, bottom left, Sunakim, he was radicalized by Aman Abdul Rahman, who's on top, the picture on top, who is the leading pro-ISIS Islamist, extremist Islamist ideologue in Indonesia. He's in jail now. But Aman was able to radicalize Sunakim and a few other of his followers into carrying out the January 2016 Jakarta attack. So that's a picture from January 2016. And we know in the Philippines, Marawi City was attacked by a group of 4 militant pro-ISIS extremist groups, including Maute Group, Abu Sayyaf, and most recently Jolo in 2019 and August 2020. There have been attacks by groups like the Abu Sayyaf, Sawat Jahan faction, who are affiliated to ISIS, right? But there's also the other concern, which I think many people know, are aware of, the returning foreign fighters from Syria, Iraq. As we know, ISIS has lost territorial holdings in the Middle East, and there have been reports that some of the Southeast Asian fighters that went up there will be coming back to the region, right? Sometimes whole families are coming back, right? So recent reports indicated 50 Indonesians and 8 Malaysians who had fought overseas have returned to the region. And in fact, some of these Indonesians have been implicated in attacks on police and a formed boil plot between 2017 and 2018. And even in Singapore, Singapore has this reputation of being very safe, but we are also on the target list of ISIS. And this is a well-known plot from 4 years ago. I'm not sure whether you've heard of this, but in Singapore, the Marina Bay Sands complex, right, was targeted in August 2016 by a pro-ISIS cell from Batam, which is in south of Singapore, Indonesian island Batam. So the leader of the cell, Gigi Ramat Deva, the guy on the right below, was in contact with the ISIS Indonesian leader Barun 9, who's now dead, in Syria. So they communicated via telegram, and they exchanged notes on bomb making. The whole plot was to fire a rocket from Batam, place called Taman Habibi, to hit Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, right? So if you have been to Batam, you can actually see the Marina Bay Sands complex, which is very iconic from Batam, right? So there was this plot to fire a rocket. It didn't work out. They didn't have the technical capability at all. But the intent was there. So of course, we in Singapore are very concerned about the ISIS threat. Unfortunately, through the cooperation with the Indonesian authorities, this plot was smashed. But we do know that Singapore is a target. So the stock exchange and the port were also identified as potential targets in an online Islamist extremist publication, which was reported in June 2017. So Singapore is also, just like the Philippines, very concerned about this threat. So the relatively organized threats, right, by networks aside, one of the bigger challenges nowadays is the threat of lone wolves, right? So now lone wolves have become a threat because they have social media, right? Whenever you have social media, you have an internet connection, you have access to information about targets and weapons. For example, the Al-Qaeda English online magazine Inspire, right, produced an article called How to Make a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom, right? And this was in English, right, but it was also translated into Bahasa in Indonesia as well. So the lone wolf, right? Some analysts are saying that eventually, if you come across, if you're able to radicalize for example, a scientist, who knows, the lone wolf downstream may be able to carry out a CBRN attack or something like that, right, through the mail system, like what we saw in the US, the anthrax incident, in October 2001. Or more likely nowadays, you don't even have to do that. You can use simple everyday weapons, and this is what the Sufan group called the weaponization of everyday life. You can use your cars, you can use knives and attack people, right, wherever they are, right? For example, we've seen that in the London attacks in March and June 2017. So you see, both Islamists and white supremacist ideologies can inspire lone wolf action, right? So it is something both can use. In fact, the lone wolf threat is a problem for security professionals because it is very diverse, right? The internet of self-radicalized lone wolf can use various means. For example, using a big truck to ram people, as we've seen this in Berlin, in Nice. We can use, for example, at the bottom, these are the Boston Marathon bombers. They made a pressure cooker bomb. Reading that article, which I mentioned, how to make a bomb from the kitchen of your mom, right? So they actually built that with that instructions they found online. Brenton Tarrant was a lone wolf in a way that he carried out his attack, and he had access to weapons. And sometimes even in the case of the Sun headline, this guy, Muhammad Adi Balayo, he killed the British soldier in broad daylight several years ago, and he used a everyday weapon, right? A knife, looks like a chopper, right? And that's the ideology right there, by the way. We killed this British soldier, it's an eye for an eye, that eye for an eye idea, right? So, in fact, in his manifesto, Tarrant also talked about using trucks in ramming attacks, just as ISIS has been calling in recent years. So again, both the white supremacists and the Islamist extremists are reading one another, learning from one another. And you know, white supremacist extremism is not so far away, right, that it does not actually, you can't say it doesn't impact us. It can impact Southeast Asians too, right? It may not be so direct, but this is something which sometimes it doesn't seem to be widely realized. But you know, Southeast Asians are globalized people, right? I mean, we work all over the world. So Southeast Asian civilians living and working or studying in Western countries could be targeted. And in fact, just a few days ago, in a Guardian newspaper, it was reported by an NGO called the End the Virus of Racism, right? That there were intelligence reports that the UK far right, which is a white supremacist movement, they were using the COVID-19 first identified in Wuhan as a reason to attack East and Southeast Asians. So we can be targeted, if not in our part of the world, in the West. So this is something which should be kept in mind. You know, there should be vigilance for Southeast Asians working overseas Western countries. And I should mention, and very soon I'll be ending, we cannot overemphasize the impact of social media. Globally, Islamist, white, and supremacist extremism seem to be fueling each other in a cycle of reciprocal radicalization. That means they radicalize each other in terrorist actions. So the internet and social media platforms are very, very important in playing this role. So I was very impressed with the New Zealand Prime Minister, Mrs. Ardern, when after the Christchurch incident, she took the lead in, together with the French president, in calling for social media companies and tech firms, governments to eliminate extremist content online. This is the well-known Christchurch call of May last year. Because the concern is, you know, we don't want to see copycat attacks on the white supremacist extremist side, or at the same time, we don't want to see retaliation by the Islamist extremist side. And you know, when social media has all these Tarrant manifesto and live stream attacks floating around, you know, you could have both copycat attacks and retaliatory attacks, right? So the Christchurch call of May 2019 is very important. You know, governments should work social media firms to sort of remove extremist content online. An example, there are a lot of examples, but I'll just give you a couple. Last year, after the Tarrant attack in New Zealand, this gentleman, John Ernest, he attacked a synagogue. He killed one lady and injured the rabbi and other worshippers. And this guy, Ernest, was inspired by the Christchurch mosque shootings. Tarrant was like a hero to him. Brendan Tarrant was a hero to this guy. And so he carried out this attack because he was also moved by this so-called great replacement idea, right? And he attacked a synagogue in April and a mosque as well previously. He attended a Presbyterian church. So, I mean, this one thing shows that, you know, you can find extremism in all the great faiths, right? So this guy, Ernest, was inspired by Tarrant to do a copycat attack kind of. On the other side of the fence, this guy, Mark Domingo, who was a US Army veteran of the Afghan war, he was a convert to Islam. He wanted to take revenge for the Christchurch attacks, and he vented on social media. So he was very angry at what Tarrant had done in attacking the mosque. So he wanted to target a white supremacist rally, and he had wanted to bomb. And by the way, that looks like a pressure cooker bomb. So this guy must have looked at the Al Qaeda Inspire magazine, How to Make a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom, right? So this is an example of online material that can be used. Fortunately, he was thwarted by the FBI. So on the one hand, you had John Ernest, who was inspired by Brendan Tarrant attack in Christchurch. On the other hand, there's this guy, Domingo, who wanted to take revenge. And they both are watching social media. They're both watching social media and they were driven to do different things, right? So coming to the end, what about COVID-19, right? Has COVID-19 had a big revolutionary impact? I wouldn't say that COVID-19 has had a big transformational impact, but it has certainly added a layer of complexity to the threat picture. There are two elements. One is operational. So operationally, security forces and law enforcement resources have been diverted, right? as we heard at the beginning of this session, right? Because now security forces have to also be involved in dealing with the whole of nation COVID-19 response. And because security forces cannot be everywhere at the same time, this has given greater space for Islamists and white supremacist groups and even lone wolves to operate. And as we know, there was a major attack earlier this year by the Abu Sayyaf group on the armed forces in April 2020, which some sources said was the most deadly attack since YOLO January 2019. White supremacist extremists have also called on their followers who are infected to deliberately, purposely go and spread COVID-19 to law enforcement and minority communities. So according to the Site Intelligence Group, they assess that the white supremacist extremists go much further than the Islamists in doing that. So that's the operational picture. But ideologically, Islamist extremists in Southeast Asia, for example, JAD in Indonesia, they claim that COVID-19, right, and they weave COVID-19 into the narrative. It is God's sign that they will win because God is punishing the infidels and apostates. So COVID-19 has given them, the Islamist extremists in Southeast Asia, an ideological boost, strengthened the narrative, right? On the other hand, the white supremacist extremist groups like Atom Weapon Division and the Base, they have also exploited COVID-19 as to implement their philosophy of accelerationism, i.e. purposely, deliberately attack law enforcement and minorities and start a race war leading to the creation of a white ethno-state. This is called accelerationism, which is a philosophy within the white supremacist movement, some groups. So COVID-19 has not been transformational, but it certainly has added a layer of complexity and been exploited by both sides to boost the morale of the respective followers. So ultimately, what can we do? I think we can talk about it during Q&A, but I think there was a very useful conference done by my school and Philippine colleagues, particularly the Philippine Center for Islam Democracy in Manila, actually three years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago. Key findings on how to fight the extremist narratives, whatever they are. We need to engage women and youth. Women and youth are critical resources. They can be radicalized, but at the same time, they can also be used to counter radicalization and prevent radicalization. Social media companies have a very significant role to play, as I pointed out. And also religious leaders. Religious leaders who are progressive, who are moderate, can set the theological baseline against which extremist narratives can be identified and debunked. So ultimately, the one big takeaway from this, I would suppose, is there is no purely kinetic solution to extremism. Whether we're talking about Islamic extremism or white supremacist extremism, you can't shoot your way out of this problem. You have to deal with a holistic, you have to deal with a more holistic fashion. So ultimately, a whole society approach terrorism and extremism remains relevant even in the age of COVID-19. So I think I'll stop there. I've spoken enough, so thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Kumar Ramakrishna. We are seeing a lot of questions coming in through Slido and our chat group. We are going to share these questions later on during the question and answer portion. So at this point, I'd like to call back Sir Derek Presto to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Our next speaker is Professor Rommel Banlaoi. Dr. Banlaoi is a Filipino academic, international security analyst, and a political science scholar. He is a chairman of the board of the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism, research and director of its Center for Intelligence and National Security Studies. He finished his BA and MA in political science in the University of the Philippines in Diliman, where he took his Ph.D. in political science. He earned his Ph.D. in international relations at Jinan University in Guangzhou, China. Dr. Banlaoi was a professor of political science and international relations at the National Defense College of the Philippines, assistant professor of international studies at De La Salle University, University Research Associate at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and instructor in political science at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He teaches at the International Studies Department of Miriam College. In 2011, he received the Albany Peace Prize Award for Peace Education. He also received the Kahangahangang Pilipino Outstanding Filipino Award in 2012 for Peace Research and National Security Education. On the occasion of 2016 World CSR Corporate Social Responsibility Congress Day in Mumbai, India, Dr. Banlaoi received the award for outstanding contribution to the humanitarian and social cause. He has authored several books, and among them are The Marawi Siege and Its Aftermath, Philippines-China Relations, Geopolitics, Economics, and Counter-Terrorism, and many more. Again, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Rommel C. Banlaoi.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for the organizer for having me again. This is my fourth time in this anti-terrorism lecture series, and I'm so fascinated every time I hear Dr. Kumar present his talk, and I learn a lot from his presentation. So I'm sure we have a lot of things to discuss during the question and answer. What I'm going to do now is to depart from my usual presentation of describing terrorist threats in the Philippines. What I would like to do now is to describe Philippine government efforts in countering violent extremism and radicalization. And if you will look at the government efforts, you will find our policy in our national security policy of 2016-2020, where violent extremism is considered to be one of the major challenges in Philippine security that needs to be addressed through a comprehensive approach. We also have a national security strategy of 2018, which requires a whole of nation approach in countering and preventing violent extremism and radicalization. And more importantly, we can also find that idea in the Philippine Development Plan 2017-2022, which states that we cannot fully achieve development in the Philippines with ongoing internal armed conflicts, and internal armed conflicts can also be addressed by countering violent extremism and violent radicalization. And of course, last year, the Anti-Terrorism Council approved the National Action Plan in preventing and countering violent extremism. And just recently, we passed the Philippine Anti-Terrorism Law of 2020, which provides important provision in countering violent extremism. And you can also find this objective in various campaign plans of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police. So let's discuss now. So now I would like to focus on discussing very briefly the National Action Plan on Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism, which was produced by the various security sectors in the Philippines with the leadership of the National Security Council and with the support of the Anti-Terrorism Council. The United Nations Development Program and other UN-related agencies provided support to the formulation of this action plan through the grant coming from the Japanese government of $3.14 million. So what are the main objectives of this National Action Plan? The National Action Plan to prevent and counter violent extremism has four important specific objectives that I consider very impressive. First is to institutionalize PCBE strategies from national down to the grassroots level, which for me is very, very important, that countering violent extremism not only requires national approach, but it has to go down to the grassroots level with the participation of the local government and civil society working in the community. And number two objective is the involvement of different stakeholders across the broadest spectrum of the society in implementing PCBE programs. And I consider this a very important innovation of the program because it can be an antidote to the front building efforts of the communist movement, because this objective can also create front building to encourage all stakeholders in the fight against violent extremism in the Philippines. And this can also contribute to the combating of terrorism in the Philippines. Number 3, this is also a very important objective, apply a comprehensive and people-centered approach to address the different drivers of radicalization. And for me, this is a great departure from our traditional notion of state-centric policy in pursuing our security interests. Now, the National Action Plan to Prevent and Counter Violent Extremism is applying a comprehensive and people-centered approach. And for me, this is a music to my ear because we have been advocating this kind of approach for a long, long time. And number 4, ensure that PCBE strategies are inclusive and culture and gender sensitive. We at the Miriam College will be happy to really implement this National Action Plan because of our gender sensitivity outlook. And lastly, ensure that PCBE strategies uphold the rule of law, international human rights law, and international humanitarian law. And this will allay the fear of human rights organizations that government efforts in fighting violent extremism can lead to violation of human rights. So if you will really examine the National Action Plan to Prevent and Combat Violent Extremism, my God, I consider this as a beautiful plan that should be implemented right away. So now, this is the framework of the National Action Plan to promote to prevent and counter violent extremism. I will not discuss this very much in detail, but I would like to emphasize that the most important part of the approach is to provide peace-building activities as an important approach in countering and preventing violent extremism, and as well as counter-terrorism. Then even the role of the local government through the Department of Interior and Local Government is also being encouraged under the National Action Plan. And I invite all of you to access this presentation from Yusek Malaya of the DILG, because this can be found in the internet on DILG efforts in preventing and countering violent extremism. So you can discuss, you can get the details from the website on this. And then most importantly, the signing of Republic Act 11479, otherwise known as the Philippine Anti-Terrorism Law of 2020, this law has a very important provision requiring the Philippine government to implement a program on countering and preventing violent extremism. So this law is in fact reinforcing and even reaffirming the implementation of the PCBE program of the national government. And the provision states that the CPBE shall address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism, which include, among others, the following, and I like enumerating the following. What are these? Ethnic, national, and religious discrimination, socio-economic disgruntlement, political exclusion, the humanization of victims of terrorism, lack of good governance, and prolonged and unresolved conflicts by winning the hearts and minds of the people to prevent them from engaging in violent extremism. Reading this provision of the anti-terrorism law is like me listening to Spotify, because all these things should be done immediately in order to really counter and prevent violent extremism in the Philippines, and as well as combating terrorism in the Philippines. Now, again, this is the presentation I got from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and I wonder why the Armed Forces of the Philippines is not disseminating this presentation to everyone. And that is why I am taking advantage of this opportunity to present Armed Forces of the Philippines' approach in preventing and countering violent extremism. And as far as I am concerned as a scholar, I have examined various approaches to prevent and counter violent extremism in the Philippines, and I consider this framework formulated by the Armed Forces of the Philippines as one of the best framework that can in fact be implemented in order to prevent and counter violent extremism in the Philippines. And I would like to share this with you. This is not mine, but this is what I got from the Armed Forces of the Philippines through my constant interactions with them. And it's so beautifully done that I think it should be heard by everybody and should be shared to everyone, so that the people will also own this framework developed by the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And I consider this framework as what excellent contribution to policymaking, and also excellent contribution to knowledge production in the area of countering violent extremism. And what are these? So look at the framework. They look at the pre-radicalization phase, that we should address. And in this pre-radicalization phase, we need to address long-term poverty, illiteracy, poor governance and corruption, lack of economic opportunity, absence of basic services, rejection of diversity political system, lack of identity, and oppression and maltreatment. We have to address these things in the pre-radicalization phase. And even in the radicalization phase, we had to address issues of radicalized individuals and organizations through madrasa, tablets, orphanage, etc., etc. And then you'll see that in countering extremism, these are the things that being proposed by the framework in order to address the problem of extremism. And about violent now, this is very important because in this framework of the armed forces of the Philippines, it separates extremism that has not been violent, just extremism in use, and extremism that has become violent. And the framework is recommending measures on how to address them. So the framework also provides the following actions in order to counter and prevent violent extremism in the Philippines. And for me, if we will just implement each step of this framework, I think we are leading to a right direction in truly preventing and countering violent extremism in the Philippines. This is beautifully done, and this is excellent framework which I discovered from the armed forces of the Philippines that should be disseminated to all. And then this is my favorite part of the framework on when is preventing violent extremism should be implemented, and where is countering violent extremism to be prevented, and what is combating violent extremism should be done. So it can be done through different stages of radicalization and extremism, as you can find in the slide. And this is my very impressive rendition how to do it. Now, if you want to, the red area means that this is an area where there's a need to combat violent extremism, and this requires the actions of the military through focused military operations. Okay, so that is the role of the security sector in combating violent extremism. But in countering violent extremism, it's represented by the yellow shade, where communities will be mobilized to be part of the overall efforts to counter and prevent violent extremism through education and cultural sensitivity, through the establishment of Ulama Council, and creation of religious rehabilitation group, which I think Dr. Kumar is already familiar because Singapore has an exemplary experiences in doing such approach. And in the prevention is the wider green space where there's a need to involve the grassroots community through community-based developmental program, co-ownership with the stakeholders, and addressing all the push and pull factors that enable violent extremism to thrive. Now, if we will just apply this framework, I think we are on the right side. And in fact, I am excited to really see how the Philippine government will apply all of these things, because if we can only apply these things, then we can successfully counter and prevent violent extremism in the Philippines. And therefore, we from the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research created this network for the prevention of violent extremism in the Philippines in order to support, critically support government efforts in countering and preventing violent extremism. And this network is composed of individuals and organizations with a voluntary mission to be part of the full initiative to prevent violent extremism in the Philippines. The main focus of this initiative is prevention, and this is a product of my series of lectures conducted in Mindanao as early as 2017. We have talked about the state of violent extremism in the Philippines, and this is the one mentioned by Dr. Kumar Ramakrishna earlier. This was an international conference that was conducted in Manila during the ASEAN Summit. We will talk about prevention of violent extremism in Southeast Asia, and all the ideas generated from this conference help us develop also the network for the prevention of violent extremism in the Philippines. And of course, during the Marawi City Siege, we participated in various efforts in order to promote this network by engaging all possible stakeholders in support of government plans to counter and prevent violent extremism. And then this is my effort a year after Marawi Siege, and presented in Miriam College, and most recently I presented this in a webinar in Zamboanga City, Threats of Violence, Extremism, and Terrorism in the Philippines amidst COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, I would like to promote also the work of my two colleagues from Miriam College, Francis Cruz and Kebart Dikayan. And hello, Kebart. Kebart is participating in this webinar. This is one of the impressive scholarly analysis of preventing and countering violent extremism, and their recommendations should also be heard by the Philippine government to consider them in the implementation of the National Action Plan, because this emphasizes the need for strategic communication, community building, and even intercultural competence in order to prevent and counter violent extremism in the Philippines. And then, of course, my partner in the Institute for Autonomy and Governance in Mindanao, they are now celebrating their 15 years of shaping public policy for peace and good governance, and they have conducted a lot of studies in order to contribute to policymaking in the prevention and countering of violent extremism in the country. Now, what is to be done? What are the things that we should do? First, in my view, these are the things that we have to do. First, ensure adequate budgetary allocation for PCBE programs and activities. Without a budget, we cannot really implement this national action plan. Just like terrorism, without the financing of terrorism, committing acts of terrorism will be difficult. And also, this can be applied in PCBE programs. Without adequate budgetary allocation, it's very difficult to implement this national action plan. And then second, sustain the implementation of program of activities from national to grassroots level, involving all stakeholders from public to private and from state to civil society sectors. And this is one of my recommendations also. Incorporate PCBE in educational curricula from preschool to graduate school so that they will be able to really internalize the value of prevention, and then utilize print, broadcast, and social media in PCBE. And that is why I'm also engaging media practitioners in order to be part of these whole efforts to prevent and counter violence extremism. And lastly, harness the support of the international community by sharing practices and building capacity on PCBE. We can learn a lot from Singapore. We can also learn a lot from Indonesia. We can learn a lot from our neighbors. And these are the things that I think the government, the civil society, and the wider community in the Philippines should do in order to effectively prevent and combat violent extremism in the country. And finally, I would like to emphasize that in the prevention and countering of violence extremism, these are the things that we really have to emphasize. First, promote the culture of peace. Culture of peace will be an antidote to the culture of violence. Uphold the principle of non-violence. Okay, this will also be an antidote against violence. Propagate the idea of moderation. Extremism, they are not tolerant. They are extreme in their ideas. So we have to balance that kind of idea. We have to counter that kind of narrative by propagating the idea of moderation and advance the philosophy of tolerance, religious and even political tolerance, gender tolerance. Okay, and even racial tolerance. We need to advance the philosophy of tolerance in order to apply PCBE. And lastly, respect the reality of human diversity. Extremism exists because they do not accept the diversity of human beings. We have to respect the reality that we are all diverse individuals. We live in a diverse world, and therefore extremism has no room in this world. So with that note, I thank you for your attention, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Rommel Banlaoi. I would like to take off from what he said. Your assignment, everybody, is to spread the word. Everybody needs to start sharing all of this information from Professor Banlaoi and Professor Ramakrishna. We are going to open the floor to questions, and I would like to start off by the ones that we have collated so far. So from Leo Ferrer, how can the government restrict the use of technology by the terrorists? How can private enterprise help the government in deterring violent extremism? So we can hear from Professor Ramakrishna or Professor Banlaoi.
Yeah, perhaps I shall go first, Rommel. Okay.
Doctor, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, right. Thanks, Rommel. That's a very good question. Rommel and I, Prof. Rommel and I referenced the big conference done by RSIS, PCID, and other stakeholders in the Philippines 3 years ago. And one of the big issues that was discussed was precisely this issue: what can be done to sort of promote better collaboration between government as well as businesses. Well, the first thing I would say is that, this kind of format, this kind of webinar, is actually precisely what should be done. I do not know who is here from, social media companies, but I would say that this kind of format done by Security Matters, ACE and Associates, Resilient.PH, and other colleagues, ASIS International, if we can broaden the group, the community, to include various, as what Prof. Rommel has said, as diverse range of stakeholders, social media companies, religious scholars, practitioners, security practitioners, think tank, academics, and government colleagues to share ideas, share their practical challenges, on the ground, right? And exchange ideas on, okay, how, this is where businesses could help, And in fact, it doesn't even have to be too big. It can be more small, focused workshops. One of the things I realized, is looking at the ASEAN circuit is that there is no shortage of conferences. There is no shortage of workshops, right? There's so many. But what we really need to be doing now, and I've said this in recent times, is to have more focused workshops looking at particular sectors. For example, what could social media companies do with governments, right? What would be the role of government, religious leaders, CSOs, civil society organizations, very focused, smaller workshops, looking at, for example, the situation in Mindanao or in West Java, right? Very focused in terms of the team, like, for example, this, what practical steps can be done. That kind of knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange, right, is very, very important, because now we have to translate ideas into actionable policy. That is very, very important. So that's what I wanted to say for this.
Prof. Rommel, you want to add?
No, I agree absolutely with Kumar. I think we can go to the next question. I agree absolutely. So.
Thank you. So this is from Carmen Gatmaitan from the Nonviolent Peace Force. Professor Kumar said that the environment of insurgency serves as conducive condition for Islamist extremists. But we all know that the peace agreement with Moro rebels is gaining ground. So what else can be done by both government, MILF, to ensure that the condition in Mindanao will no longer be conducive for extremists?
This is a very, very good practical question. And in fact, I'm a historian by background. We have a lot of examples from history as well. I mean, I've studied the British counterinsurgency experience in Malaya. And one of the things which stood out from there was that essentially good ideas and policies and legislation must be implemented on the ground, General Templer, who was the High Commissioner and the Director of Operations during the Malayan emergency in the 1950s in Malaya, 1952-54, he was the famous guy who came out with the winning hearts and minds phrase, right? He always said, we don't need many new ideas. In fact, we already have good ideas. So I'm paraphrasing him. What we just need to do is to ensure that these ideas get properly implemented on the ground. Enough, which means like what Prof. Rommel is saying, there must be enough resources, there must be budget, must ensure that you get the right people in, people who have local knowledge, people who are able to build good relationship in the community, and campaigns that promote good ideas, good community relations, So in fact, I would agree with the questioner's point that now with the passage of the Bangsamoro Organic Law and the creation of the BAR, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Mindanao, it's a fantastic step. It is a fantastic step. It's an amazingly important step. So now It is all about implementation. One of the key elements, I would say, speaking as an outside analyst, is that for one of the things that needs to be done is to ensure that the reconstruction of the Marawi city is done in a way which will enable those residents who have been displaced to return home, go back to their homes. And if this can be done, and if the potential of Mindanao, economic potential can be exploited in a effective way, this will do a lot of, go a long way to reduce the grievances, the socio-economic grievances that the extremist ideologues can exploit to radicalize more people. So it's about implementation. Thanks.
Okay. Next question from Eddie De Castro. May I ask if giving much credit to the extremist groups here in the Philippines would just strengthen their fundings from countries and individuals who are known to be supporters of the terroristic alliances in the Southeast Asia there?
Yep, I think that's a fair point. This is the terrorist groups, right? They feed off publicity. Publicity is political oxygen for them. If their activities are reported widely, it is possible that they will be able to generate more awareness of their actions and activities. That's why it is important for colleagues in the media to be careful in the way that such groups are reported. It is important not to paint them in a way which promotes their agenda or paints them as, desirable role models, because ultimately, the idea is to prevent them from recruiting. We do not want them to recruit, right? So the calibrated media reporting, I think, is very important. Having said that, whether or not these groups get publicity, those who are already committed followers, right, committed to the agenda of such groups, they will carry on. They will still get their support from the likes of ASIS Central and other supporters, because there will still be a small community of true believers that will continue to support these groups. But through calibrated media reporting, there's an opportunity to ensure that such a community doesn't grow with more supporters.
Right. Interesting to note. I think we have somebody from the media participating in this lecture. I see a name from CNN Philippines. Professor Rommel, you have to add? You can add?
Well, regarding the question, I would like to add two things to really contribute. We are doing a lot of things in terms of focused military operations and law enforcement operations, but there are things to do more in the area of countering violent extremism in the social media, because that's their major platform. So we need to do more efforts countering them through social media. We need to counter their narrative. We have to counter their propaganda, and we need to counter their use of social media. And secondly, countering the financing of terrorism. So we have done little efforts in that area, but there are a lot more rooms for improvement, and we need to strengthen our capacities in countering the financing of terrorism. If we can do that, we can in fact contribute a lot in countering terrorism and preventing violent extremism through social media and countering the financing of terrorism. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. This is a comment from Carmen again. In Mindanao, the Islamist extremists who are supposed to protect Islamic followers are victimizing fellow Muslims too. Even in Syria, the same civilian refugees are Muslims. So where is the logic there? I think it's more of her comment. This is another question from her for Professor Rommel. Why do you think, despite PH government efforts, violent extremism still remains a significant threat in the country?
Because of the conducive environment, the conducive environment takes a lot of time to really address, the Philippines is a fertile ground, so we need to plant another seed that will grow. Rather than planting the seeds of violent extremism, we have to plant the seeds of culture of peace. We have to plant the seeds of non-violence. We have to plant the seeds of moderation. We have to plant the seeds of tolerance, you know. So because the Philippines is really a fertile ground, so that's why we have to deal with this for a long period of time, you know, because addressing the conducive conditions cannot be done overnight. It takes a lot of process. It will take even a generation. So we have to deal with it. What is the good thing is that the Philippine government right now has a better understanding on how to do this. And the Philippine government right now is now listening to people like me, unlike before, they were quarreling with me. So I'm very happy that they are closely working with me right now. So I'm so glad. And that is why I also encourage my colleagues in the academy to be part of this webinar, because I told them that our armed forces of the Philippines, our Philippine National Police, have also become tolerant of our views. You know, they hate listening to us because, you know, we academics, we like to talk a lot of ideas, but it's very important that we engage our law enforcement because, you know, the knowledge that we produce can inform public policy. And that is why, Dr. Kumar, we have been doing this for almost 2 decades, Dr. Kumar, for almost 20 years, you know, 19 years already after 9/11, even before 9/11, we have been doing this. But I'm glad that our armed forces of the Philippines, our Philippine National Police, our government, they are all also appreciating the contribution from the academe. They're already appreciating the contribution from the larger civil society. And we hope they can sustain that kind of appreciation so that we can work together to address this problem. So it will take time to do this, but the good thing, you know, we are in the right direction. And just look at my presentation about the armed forces of the Philippines. I was humbled that the armed forces of the Philippines can generate that kind of framework, which I think, you know, better than what the academy can produce. So I really salute them for that kind of endeavor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Rommel. Now, if you will direct your attention to the chat, Mr. Kevart Likayan just shared with us the link to their policy brief. And as Professor Ramakrishna and Professor Banlaoi has been saying all this time, let's get the word out there. The more that we share this information, the better we are at trying to resolve these issues. This is now a question from Ryan Chan to the panel.
May I say something about Kibart? I encourage him to do this task because Dr. Kumar and I are already aging and we need young people to sustain this process. So we develop young people also. We encourage young people to do this stuff because Kumar and I will not live forever. So we need young people to sustain this kind of scholarship. And thank you, Kibart, for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, from Ryan Chan, these are 3 questions. I'll read them so that our lecturers can just feel free which one to answer first. So first question, what are your general thoughts on the current capabilities of active extremist militant groups in the Philippines? Increasing, decreasing, unchanged? Second question, originally there seemed to be difference in goals between religious extremist groups and separatist groups. Now with ISIS elements in the mix, are groups competing or merging ideologies? And to the security risk management experts in the Philippines, what are the security operational challenges in responding to affected clients across the Philippines? Given the geographical terrain of many islands, most companies seem to be based in the urban centers in Luzon. So we'll ask our lecturers to choose which one of the questions they would like to tackle first.
Go ahead, Dr. Kumar, my friend.
Okay, sure. Sure, no. Yep. Again, good questions. My own assessment as an external observer of the current capabilities, well, I'm actually quite concerned, right? Because certainly, if you have seen what has been happening since the Yolo Cathedral bombings in January 2019, suicide bombing has come in a significant way to the conflict in the southern Philippines. So there have been, I think, about 5 such attacks. So this shows a trend which is not good, which has to be dealt with, which has to be countered. You know, one of the things which I also note is that, for example, in the Yolo incident of January 2019, the 2 bombers were foreign militants. They were not from the Philippines. They were from Indonesia, from the JAD group, the JAD network, which I mentioned. So the question is, you know, was there a way they could have been, these suicide bombers could have been prevented from coming to southern Philippines, which calls into question again the importance, not calls into question, but spotlights the importance of guarding porous borders between Indonesia, Eastern Indonesia, and the Southern Philippines. There needs to be some way to sort of prevent such a transfer of personnel, right, between JAD in Indonesia and to the ASG faction in the south of the Philippines, which carries out these bombings. So this shows to me that in terms of the suicide attack capability, this is an increase. This is a distinct increase. So that's my view. In terms of the goals, right? I wouldn't say that ideologies are merging in terms of the Islamist extremist front in Southern Philippines. I would say that the groups are splintering. The groups are splintering. For example, MILF has now, for more than a decade now, they've been going into the process of political engagement with the central government. And this is why you have the Bangsamoro autonomous region, which is very important, very positive development. But of course, in all movements, right, there will be those networks and groups which don't agree with the main thrust of the main groups, right? So you have, for example, ASG splintering out from the main body of MNLF, MILF, right? Movements. Then from ASG, now you have the BIFF, Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters. So it is not so much, so while you have political engagement by MILF, other groups don't want to compromise. Other groups still want to have independent Islamic entity in the south, and they don't want to have anything to do with the government. And so they split and they splinter and they come out. So it's, to me, it's not really a merging of ideologies, but it is a splintering because of different deviation in ideologies. It's something you see all over in Southeast Asia, for example, in Indonesia, right? Jamaah Islamiyah came out from Darul Islam movement. Then from JI also, you had further evolution. Now you have the JAD, Jamaah Ansarut Daulah. Then also you had the new mutations of the groups like MIT in East Indonesian Mujahideen in Poso, right? So it's a process of splintering all the time. So I wouldn't say it's merging, I would say it's splintering because of different ideological interpretations and different leaders, different personalities with different points of view, right? That'll be my contribution.
Sir Ace, you might like to answer also the question about the security. What are the security operational challenges in responding to affected clients across the Philippines?
Leave that to Rommel.
Yeah, thank you, professors. I will answer this because it's addressed to the security professionals. And I'm sure that a lot of the listeners also can contribute into this answer. Be a consultant to several companies. The challenge really is the exposure of their corporate assets in several islands, and in especially those in the rural or areas wherein they are not really completely minded at all, or sometimes forgotten by the systems. No? So that's why what is really important for companies that are based in urban areas is to do a lot of or a very comprehensive risk assessment, because this is where everything starts. You know, knowing yourself, knowing your threats, and then should be holistic and independent. It should not be done by groups that has been vested interest. So what's important is that when you look at the threat, it should focus on all the forms of terror attacks now, especially those made by terrorists in the kitchen of their moms, meaning we can go beyond explosions already and bombing. So in the Philippines, it's somehow reversed. A lot of our incidents are in the southern Philippines. No, it's in Hulu, Sulu. And the tendency there is that we only mind them if there's an explosion. But are we still constantly or vigilant in making sure that we are preparing in all areas of the country? Because before, it was just Manila. Then years ago, that was Bohol and Cebu. Then Davao. So we can see that it's not only in the the Hulu-Sulu and Basilan area. It has been happening in Iligan, Cagayan de Oro, Davao, and then even in areas of Caraga provinces. Then it moves towards the islands of Visayas, and then it's not just we can conclude that it will be affecting also Metro Manila. So the holistic approach is really important. Starts with risk assessment. That's why we really push that after risk assessment, what now? After your reaction, are you resilient? Can we bounce back better? I hope you answered the question of Ryan Chan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next question. This is again from Carmen. The National Action Plan for the Prevention and Countering of Violent Extremism is very good and comprehensive. Has there been any assessment done so far to know what are we doing right or wrong as far as implementing the action plan? In Basilan, there is a PAVE, and in Sulu, there is a BRAVE, BRAVE, as PCBE in frameworks. But what are we missing? Because violent extremism still remains to be a major security threat. Professor Rommel, maybe you'd like to take this one on first.
Okay. First, of course, the first thing that should be done is for the Philippine government to publicize this national action plan, because it has not been publicized. This has just been circulated to concerned government agencies. So if the government wants this action plan to be owned by the Filipino people, it has to be publicized, be made public, remove the label of classification there, remove the restricted level and make it public, because you cannot own the national action plan. It remains to be classified and it remains to be in the hands of the security sector. It has to be disseminated from the national to the grassroots level that they intend to reach out. So that's the number one thing that the national. And then second, very, very important, is for this national action plan to, for the Philippine government to take stock of all the private and civil society efforts in countering and preventing violent extremism, and the government should harmonize all these efforts and create a convergence strategy so that all these efforts will be put under one whole framework, meaning we are working together for this cause. Unlike now that, I'm doing my own thing, the non-violent peace force also doing its own thing, the different universities doing their own thing. So what we need is a convergence strategy in order to harmonize all our efforts towards a certain national goal. So that's the thing we need to do. And in that regard, then we can really say that the National Action Plan is really whole of nation approach. Thank you.
A follow-up question for Professor Rommel. Is there a current directory of all of these groups working to promote the prevention and counter-extremism initiatives?
Yes. The National Action Plan lists all government agencies involved and all civil society involved and individuals involved. They have the list, but that's why we need to publicize, because there might be some other stakeholders that are not in the list and willing to be part of it. In fact, one of the things that I'm proposing is involvement of the private security professional in this work. And I think the private security professional, hey, Wally, you have to initiate this thing. Don't wait for the national government to reach you out. You have to reach out to them and propose something that can be done in order to encourage public and private partnership in countering and preventing violent extremism. I think that is a huge gap in our prevention strategy, the involvement of the private sector. And I think you should initiate that and be part of this whole national efforts. Kasi medyo nakita ko na the private security professionals are not truly engaging the government sector. It's high time to also align your efforts with government efforts. Thank you.
Okay. This is from John Sangalang to both panelists. This is a simple but most of the time confusing concept. Counter-terrorism, preventing terrorism. The differences are apparent, especially in terms of phases and approaches. What about anti-terrorism? What makes it different from counter-terrorism in terms of strategy and approach or nuances?
Okay, I can offer my own views on this before Prof. Rommel comes in. That's a fair question. And I have to say that there various academics and perhaps even practitioners will have their own approach to this. But at least for myself, to me, the prevention part is, as the name implies, is to prevent terrorism essentially through preventing radicalization into violent extremism in the first place. So it's protective. It's protective of the community through various programs to prevent extremist ideology from taking root in the wider community. So that's prevention, right? Counter is what strategies are being used by the security forces and other stakeholders to defeat terrorist groups, counter, right? Through pursuing them and disrupting them, cutting their logistics, cutting their financing. So that's counter. Anti is, to me, more protective of infrastructure. Protective of infrastructure. For example, how do you protect your crowded places? How do you protect your key installations? You know, do you have CCTVs? You know, do you have a trained security personnel, security guards? You know, how do you protect your population centers? You know, so there's more protective of the physical infrastructure and physical security. So this is how I would make a distinction between these various categories. But I accept that others may have a different approach.
Okay, on my part, so let's see, anti-terrorism. For me, I agree with Dr. Kumar. I just would like to add something more. For me, anti-terrorism refers to our stand against terrorism, that we are against it. And this stand against terrorism can be reflected in policy and can be reflected in various countermeasures. Okay, so that's anti-terrorism, that we are against terrorism. Counter-terrorism can be reflected more in measures, like law enforcement measures, focused military operations, law enforcement operations, and even other approaches that can involve the wider community that are not non-military and non-law enforcement in nature. So that is countering, meaning you're already acting on it. Anti-terrorism is more your stand, your position, your policy, your commitment. So that's anti-terrorism. Counter-terrorism is more your action to address the threats of terrorism. Now, preventing violent extremism or countering violent extremism is an ideology that justifies acts of terrorism. So for me, if you want to counter violent extremism or prevent counter violent extremism, you have to counter the ideology. It's a counter ideological approach, because this ideology justifies acts that we now call terrorism. So that's my academic take on that issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sirs. From Sir Hermie Colina, do you think we have learned from the lessons of the past, MNLF to MILF to BIFF / ASG?
Rommel, you want to take that?
You first, Dr. Kumar, you're our guest, main guest. Go ahead.
Well, my immediate response is the very fact that we have now the passage of the Bangsamoro Organic Law and the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region is, to me, a very clear indication that some of the major lessons of the past of history have been learned. That's why now we have that Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, which is very important, very symbolic, psychologically, and politically for the population in the south of the country. So to me, that is the easy response, because I think it was very, very long process to come to this point. And I believe that through the good political will of both the central government as well as the interlocutors in the south, we have arrived at this position, which is very important, very hopeful, and a right direction for the population in the south. So to me, yes, I think lessons have been learned.
Well, for me, the great lesson learned is that, getting from the MNLF and MILF experience is, one, the threats of terrorism is evolving. It's not static. It's constantly evolving. We have addressed the MNLF, we have addressed the MILF, but we still continue to face the threat because threats are evolving. So as our countermeasures should also evolve. So it's not static, you know, and we have to be more innovative in countering them because, you know, threats are evolving and innovative. We should work twice as fast than them so that we can outsmart them before they outsmart us. So that's the lessons learned.
Okay, thank you. This one is from V. Arianti to Professor Rommel. May I know why the Philippines court could not convict Minhati Madrais on the ground of terrorism financing, despite it is believed that she had cryptocurrency and access to cash to finance terrorism?
The problem is the evidence, you know, that's the problem now because our existing law talks about evidence. But the sad thing is that the anti-terrorism law of 2020 cannot be used against her because her actions were committed prior to the passing of that law. But if the law will be applied, it can be she can be prosecuted under the anti-terrorism law of 2020. And I think that's the problem, the lack of getting evidence. So yeah, I think we need more capacity building to strengthen prosecutorial power of our government in order to really put to justice all individuals associated with acts of terrorism. So we need to build capacity not only of the police in charge of investigation, but also of the lawyers in charge of prosecution, and also capacity of judge who will render judgment on the issue. So a lot of capacity building needed. And that's in fact indicated in the anti-terrorism law of 2020, the need to develop capacity building to counter terrorism, not only legal, but also other law enforcement measures. Thank you.
Okay. This is from Richard Legarda. How do we counter social media? I think he's referring to the use of social media to help in the prevention and countering of violent extremism.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think we can actually counter social media because social media now it's very much part of us. I mean, so the only thing you can do is not so much counter social media, but to use social media better than the extremists. In other words, working with social media companies, the big tech firms, to ensure, like what I mentioned, the Christchurch call to action last year, May 2019, that was a very important, very, very symbolic, powerful statement of intent between governments, social media firms to sort of remove extremist content. So there are two things. Number one, you need to work together, governments, social media companies, civil society, relevant civil society organizations should work together to identify and remove social media content from social media. And at the same time, work with progressive religious and community leaders to put progressive, positive, constructive counter-narratives and even alternative positive narratives online to sort of ensure and make them, you know, it's not just a matter of putting content online. That's the first step, but you also have to ensure that the content is what some analysts call sticky. It is memorable. It is attractive. It attracts young people to sort of like pay attention. So one needs to be able to put out social media themes and narratives which are more attractive to young people than the extremist idea. So this is a big challenge. It is not just the job of social media companies alone. The social media companies can provide the platforms, the technical expertise, but many more stakeholders. Young people, I would say young people are very important, as I mentioned. Women have a role to play. Of course, religious leaders, experts, academic experts, think tank experts. I would say even advertising companies. Advertising companies have a role to play because they know how to attract audience. So this is actually a very important question. So, but my response is we can't counter social media, but we must use social media better.
Okay, thank you, Professor. This one is from Ramil of the PRC Board of Criminology. I noticed in the presentation that most of the underlying causes before a person go through the process of radicalization are mostly poverty and social ills. But these causes are hard to solve in any society, especially in developing countries. Is it not impossible to eradicate completely? So first question, are we then saying that so long that these causes exist, then radicalization at the base of the pyramid, the potential radicals will always exist. And number two, if we are able to solve the radicalization, then it is not easy to solve, since in the pyramid of causes, ideologues in the top is the least in terms of process of radicalization, which is easy to solve. The higher few ideologues or the forced victims of social ills.
Right. I'll try to answer that, but I think Prof. Rommel wanted to say something just now.
Oh, first, regarding the last question about the social media, for me, in my observation, social media is in fact a very anarchic environment. So very anarchic. We need to police social media, just like policing our streets, you know. We need to police our streets in order to maintain peace and stability in our community. But the social media is not yet policed. There are a lot of crimes happening in social media, and the sad thing, it is not policed very well. So I think it's high time for law enforcement to start policing the social media. Otherwise, the social media will be an environment for anarchy that will justify proliferation of the ideology of violent extremism. And to the second question about violent extremism, yeah, that's why we need to counter the ideology of violent extremism, because the ideology of violent extremism is exploiting the condition of poverty, exploiting the condition of injustices, exploiting a lot of things to justify acts of violence. That is why we need to really counter the ideology that use conducive conditions to justify acts of terrorism. So it needs a counter-ideological approach so that poverty, injustices, and grievances will not be used to justify acts of terrorism, and stress to them that if you have grievances, if you have poverty, there are more peaceful way to address them. And that's the thing that we need to propagate, that there are peaceful approaches to address poverty, to address injustices, and to address all types of social, cultural, and even religious grievances.
Thank you,
I fully agree, my colleague, Prof. Rommel. I think counter-ideological approaches, counter-narratives, campaigns are very, very important. You know, this is a very good and interesting question. It's actually quite a deep question when you talk about the process of radicalization and the role of poverty and social ills. But you know, poverty can be a driver of radicalization in conjunction with extremist ideology. But at the same time, if you look at the terrorist groups since September 11, right? We can't really say that you know, poverty explains everything. For example, the September 11 hijackers, right? They were not poor. I mean, they came from very well-educated families. Some of them had training in Germany and undergoing master's education, right? If you look at even in Southeast Asia, some of the militant who were involved with Jamaah Islamiyah, they had PhDs, right, from UK, British universities. So poverty can be a driver, but it's not always so. It's not always so. I mean, if you look, for example, at the profile of the militants, Jamaah Islamiyah in Singapore, in Malaysia, they were not poor. They had jobs. They were, in fact, relatively, they were okay. It was essentially what drove them. Certainly in Singapore, the militants in Jamaah Islamiyah almost 20 years ago was a sense of being spiritually lost. You know, they felt that, you know, they were not being very good in the faith and were looking for more answers, more to life. And unfortunately, they ended up going down the extremist Islamist route. So it's a searching for meaning, Having said that, if you look at certainly in the Southern Philippine case, I would say that poverty and social ills can be a factor. I would say that poverty and social ills, if we are able to deal with that, it will reduce the grievances which can be then exploited by the extremist ideologues. So I think, yes, I mean, this is very, very important. So there is a relationship between poverty, socioeconomic ills, sense of socioeconomic discrimination, and all these are elements and grievances that a skilled extremist ideologue can exploit and radicalize people. So there is a relationship, dynamic relationship between these factors.
Ace would like to add to the social media answers.
Yes, I think we have to understand that if a person is posting anything in social media, he already waived his rights to privacy because it's already in a social media. What is the privacy issue is then if we go and read their messages inside their SMS, their Viber chat group, WhatsApp, or Telegram. But who can hack into a Telegram unless you become a member? You fake your identity so that a member of a group. But the point there is that we should also understand that social media is different from digital connections. There are chat groups like say Facebook. There are social or Facebook pages wherein people can exchange. If you have a Facebook account and then it's open to everybody, you cannot claim privacy because you shared it to the entire world. That's why there's a symbol of the world or the globe there, you know. So if people are exchanging there, then that's practically waiving their own right because they told the world. So the military, the police, or anti-terror groups don't need to say that we will monitor social media because almost everybody in TikTok are monitoring everybody because they want to be in social media. See, the point there is that people who are planning to commit, say, radicalization and then attacks, they don't use social media. They use private messaging apps. So private messaging app is practically under privacy law. That's why it's called please PM me, private message me. So I think that should be really clarified to us that a lot of the people react because in social media, they thought that they have privacy. I always tell them what you place in the internet is already your waiving of rights to your privacy because it's in the internet, it's in the world to see. Even if you share that among your friends, that's already among your friends, and then you do not know if you have 5,000 friends. See, and your 5,000 friends, each one has 5,000 friends, and then they share it to others. So, and then you were not able to block your sharing, then those are the areas that has to be considered. So narratives are discussed outside social media. The narratives where the pre-radicalization could be in social media. And then that's where you pick, that's where you harvest people that you radicalize through an area. So I think we're running out of time, but we're happy to really go over time always
Right,
here.
Sir Ace. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you
Yes.
for that. I'm going to read the questions and would appreciate from our lecturers if they can give
Yes.
maybe one sentence answer so with that we are able to answer all of the remaining questions. If that's okay?
Yep.
Okay, so next question. We can see now in our countryside, suicide bombers we least expected. The last two female bombers were wives of killed terrorists. How do we counter and prevent family members from being exploited by terrorist organizations?
Okay, wow, that's a one sentence answer to that. It's well, I would. It's actually complicated, but I would say that families are basic unit of warfare here against the extremists. You see, I would say the parents, the father, the mother, if we can reach them with the progressive counter narratives and secure them, they will have a good impact, a positive impact, not only on their children, but in the community as well. Which is why I mention again and again, women, the role of women as mothers, as spouses, and even the role of the father. I mean, there's a lot of psychological literature that says that the role of the father as a role model is so important for families, which means good, strong families, which are supported by a strong social welfare network, economic opportunity. Strong families are a good protection, strong protection against extremism. So I will stop there.
Thank you. To Dr. Banlaoi, USD 3.14 million is a huge sum for the PCVE. What specific projects do PCVE as a part of the effort?
Yeah. Indeed, it's a really a huge sum of money, but we need to ask how they utilize that. But I think the honorarium fee for consultants are really good. In fact, I want to apply for consultancy for that project, but it's really a huge sum of money. But I think we need to encourage or invite the Anti-Terrorism Council, the National Security Council, to talk more about that, because I don't want to offend their sensitivities on the use of funds. But indeed, for a national action plan, 3.4 million US dollars can do a lot more. But I think now they developed this national action plan, so I think they use that to pay people and pay for hotels and foods and travel expenses. You know what I mean.
Okay.
But regarding the utilization of funds, it's better that we ask them how they use it. But I think they are transparent. They are publishing it in website on how they utilize the fund for purposes of financial transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. This is from Marie Abejuela. She mentioned her background. She discovered that due to the lack of proper communication, the National Action Plan has not been communicated properly, cascaded to the different NGCs and LGUs, so the programs have not really been implemented. And this is the question that she's raising. I know COVID-19 has probably affected operations. However, does the government have a definite plan or strategy to cascade the action plan to make sure that they can actually be implemented in the LGUs?
Yeah, I saw their plans, and I know some of their activities also, but there are a lot of things to be done more in order to make that action plan really an action rather than plan. But right now there are more plans than actions. What we want to see is more actions than plans.
Okay.
So, and we need to be part of this. We need to be part of this. We need to reach out our government and say, hey, but the first thing to do that is for the national government to make that plan public, because now it's not yet public. It's only being circulated to the members of the National Security Council, Anti-Terrorism Council, and concerned agencies of the national and local government. It has to be disseminated to all. I have a copy, but I don't want to be the source of leakage.
Okay, so we will not force you to do that, sir. Okay, next from Alexander Lopez. In a collision of terrorist activities and COVID-19 pandemic, do you see a good plan of action of the government to address the occurrence of this?
Kumar, you want to say something, Kumar?
Well, I mean, I'll defer to Prof. Rommel on what is being done in the Philippines, but in general, I think this is a key question for all the governments in our region, well, even beyond our region, because essentially, yeah, I mean, the basic problem is COVID-19 has really had a big impact in terms of the attention span and the bandwidth of the law enforcement and security forces. So they will have no choice but to sort of get involved in implementing the public health measures, safe distancing, and to ensure, for example, in some countries, assisting the public health authorities in implementing some of the public health measures. So naturally, because of opportunity cost, you can't be everywhere. So this has created operational space for some of these groups to act, and we have seen that already in southern Philippines and even in Indonesia, in eastern Indonesia. So this is a challenge. And essentially, I would say that at this point, it is important for the relevant authorities, to be aware that there are two ways in which, as I mentioned, these groups are exploiting COVID-19. Number one, operationally, they're exploiting the space created. So that we at least be aware of that. And secondly, ideologically, they are exploiting it to sort of like say that, well, now COVID-19 has a sign from God, for example, that we are winning. So there's at least a need to counter that through the narratives, counter narratives to say this is not a sign of God, you know. So there are various things that can be done, at least at the counter ideological level. But that it is important to sort of be aware that COVID-19 has given an opportunity for some of these groups to exploit. So the governments and relatives, other stakeholders should be aware.
Okay, first, COVID-19 is exacerbating the conducive conditions that justify acts of terrorism. And terrorist groups are exploiting these conditions. So we really have to address the economic, social, and political consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. Otherwise, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic will exacerbate these conducive conditions that justify acts of terrorism. So we need the government to do more and accomplish more, in order to improve the current situation that we find ourselves.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you to our lecturers. We are 11 minutes past our target end time, so we are going to hold on to the rest of the questions. We'll try to share them with our lecturers, and we'll leave it to their discretion to try to see if they can send back some responses. No pressure, because these gentlemen are very busy. So to wrap things up, I'd like to call the chairman of ASIS Philippines, Mr. Jonathan Costales, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Wally. It's a great pleasure to hear from both speakers and to see many participants attending this lecture. I think they have more questions, but apparently we do not have time for those questions. So for today's meeting, we would like to thank Professor Kumar and Professor Rommel for imparting us important and extensive information about terrorism, radicalization, and other concepts such as extremism, lone wolves, and most importantly, the government effort on counter-terrorism. Anyway, we would also like to thank the participants for their positive response. And we hope that you have learned a lot and have a better insight on these subjects so you can bring the knowledge back to your organization and can better prepare on your crisis management and business continuity programs. And as you try to assess the impact of terrorism to your personnel and assets and how we can collaborate and coordinate efforts. And finally, on behalf of Security Matters, ASIS Associates and ASIS International Philippines Chapter, again, we would like to convey our appreciation to all for taking their time to be here today. Thank you and good day.
Thank you, Sir Jonathan. Well, can we have our traditional photo taking opportunity? So if you can turn on your videos, but we can have some souvenir with our professors, Professor Kumar and Professor Rommel. Okay. Thank you again, everybody. Smile. There are several windows, so we'll be doing a couple of this for a prolonged period of time. Thank you. And just as what Professor Kumar and Professor Rommel has been saying, let's continue joining forces to make sure that all of us become part of the solution in trying to combat and prevent violent extremism, which, as we have seen from 2001 with the 9/11 up to now, in the recent bombing in Jolo, has continued to be a serious threat to all of us. So again, thank you to our special guests. Thank you to all the participants. Watch out for the next installment of the Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series. Good morning, everybody. Have a safe day and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr. Kumar.
you.
Thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, General Kirby.
Thank you, everybody. Morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Again, as mentioned, we will be sharing the recording to the participants, but it is also going to be made available in the social media assets of Security Matters and ASIS Associates.
Thank you.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Sir Ariel. Thank you, Christian. Regards sa Boracay. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Neil. Kamusta dyan sa Mindanao? Thank you for joining. Thank you for asking question, John. Continue tayo sa chat. Thank you to the RCCs for joining. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.
And Sir Ace, I think as what was recommended by both Professor Kumar and Professor Banlaoi, we can continue to engage maybe in a smaller sessions,
Yes.
other participants here to touch base with Security Matters so that we can find out how to continue to bring the messages across the different stakeholders in the community.
Yes. I agree. A good thought.